So thank you so much, Dean Eramo, for speaking with us this morning about the complicated and obviously sensitive issue of sexual assault. To start off, do you mind just telling me a little bit about yourself, about your role at the university?
Sure. So I'm an associate dean of students here at the university, and one of the roles that I play is to also chair the Sexual Misconduct Board. And in that role, I make sure the board is staffed and trained to hear cases of sexual misconduct. And I also coordinate the cases when they come through to make sure the panels get put together and that the students understand what's going to be happening in the process, and then kind of work with both students and their advisors to get them to the hearing and get them what they need.
And you are the new chair this year, is that correct?
No, I've been the chair of the Misconduct Board since 2007.
Oh, wow.
Or 6 actually, since the fall of 2006. And then I also work with survivors a good deal, so when we hear of sexual assaults or any type of sexual misconduct, usually that student will get referred to me to get resources and support. So I'll work with the student to figure out, do they need academic accommodations, do they need living accommodations, do they need counseling support, health support, just trying to figure out what are they ready for, what do they need, do they want to report to the police, do they want to report to the board, how that works, and just kind of help them through that.
Okay, great. In an email yesterday, Carol Wood called you an expert in all issues related to sexual assault.
I feel blessed by that, I guess.
How did that goal develop for you?
Well, I actually was an undergraduate here, and I did my undergraduate thesis on women and gender and feminism. And so I've had an interest in this for quite some time. And after I graduated, I did start working at the university, but I also worked part-time at the Shelter for Health and Emergency as a hotline volunteer first, and then as a weekend manager. I actually worked there at least one weekend a month. And then when I moved to the Dean of Students office, I actually served on the Sexual Misconduct Board in my prior role as Special Assistant to the Honor Committee. I was just a member of the board. When I was hired here to be initially an assistant dean, Vice President Lampkin asked me to take over chairing the board because of my background and work with survivors of domestic violence.
So I was going to ask this later, but what is the role of the Sexual Misconduct Board exactly?
So the Sexual Misconduct Board is the official adjudication body for cases of sexual misconduct on grounds. So essentially, sexual misconduct is a standards of conduct violation, which the other 12 standards, well, it's one of the first, it's standard number 1, it's part of the physical assault and sexual misconduct. But all of the other standards are heard by the UJC, which is a student body. Yeah. But essentially that body has said, we believe that there needs to be a separately trained body for these particular offenses. So it has a separate set of procedures, the Sexual Misconduct Board does, versus UJC, and a separate set of persons who hear those cases. And it's chaired by a faculty or staff member like myself. So it's made up of faculty, staff, and students. So we do have students, at least one student on every panel. And the panels are made up of at least 3 members, so you have at least 2 faculty and at least 1 student on every panel. And they're all trained in the same way, and they work together in the same way.
Interesting. So what is the breakdown of the members of the Sexual Misconduct Board? How many professors, how many students in total?
Yeah, so we have about 30 members, 30 to 35 members right now. I actually haven't counted since folks have graduated and such, and usually about half of those are students.
Okay. And do you mind walking me through kind of the process when a student reports an honor offense to the university and not to the police?
An honor offense or a sexual misconduct case? So when they report, first of all, they can report to both places. So if they want to have a police investigation as well as a Sexual Misconduct Board investigation, so those 2 things can happen at the same time. But we do generally provide some deference to the police investigation because they have the ability to do a search warrant, and they have the ability to, the element of surprise, which we don't have in the luxury of in our process. So we'll provide them with some time to get that investigation rolling generally before we'll start our process. Okay. But they can go concurrently. But in terms of the Sexual Misconduct Board investigation, what happens is a student will say they want to file a complaint. They'll file that complaint with Dean Groves. And they don't have to provide a full account of what occurred in that initial complaint to Dean Groves. All they have to say is, I want to file a Sexual Misconduct Board complaint. I want to file a formal complaint against this individual for an incident that happened on this date at this time in this location. And then he forwards that on to university investigators who investigate that case. So they will talk to the complainant, they'll talk to the accused, they'll talk to anybody around those individuals who might have important information to share, and they'll collect evidence and information. So that might be text messages, it could be photographs, it could be anything that could be conceivably relevant to the case. And then they pull all that together into an investigator's report. And basically in that report, what they try to do is build a narrative of what happened over the course of the night where the incident occurred from both perspectives. And a lot of times what you'll see is there's not a lot of difference until certain like key points in the evening. And then they'll show where there might be a policy violation within that narrative. And they forward that on to me to put together a hearing. Then I pull together, I pull in the students and talk to them, not together but separately, just to make sure they understand what's going to happen from here forward. And then I assign them an advisor who's a member, not necessarily a member of the board, but somebody who trains with the board, who understands the process, and who's a faculty or staff member, who can work with them to help prepare their case, but also provide support and emotional support and process support throughout.
So the Sexual Misconduct Board, they essentially do a hearing, is that correct?
Yes, they do. So once that the students have their advisors, the case moves forward to a hearing. There's a non-voting chair that's selected from the board, and then board members. So again, I usually have about 5 members on each panel, plus the non-voting chair, so it's about 6 people.
So this Sexual Misconduct Board actually delivers like a guilty, not guilty verdict? They
do. So they'll hear from both the complainant and the accused, and any witnesses those students would like to have appear in person. Okay. They have the benefit of that investigator's report, as well as any additional evidence that the students may wish to include. And they'll make a decision based on that evidence packet of information, as well as the testimony that they hear during the course of the day.
So I've talked to 2 professors on the Sexual Misconduct Board this week, and that's why I slipped about the honor fence.
Oh, no worries.
One actually told me that he was under the impression that honor delivered the final charge. And I said, well, who gives a guilty, non-guilty verdict? And he said, oh, well, it goes to honor.
That's very surprising to me, and I'd be interested to know who that is, because I can't imagine that somebody who's trained with our board would think that.
Well, I'm an honor fence, so I know that to not be true.
Right.
I also had another professor tell me that the chair was a Catherine Laughlin, I believe.
Catherine Long is the chair of a different group. So I'm wondering if maybe you interviewed somebody who's part of that group and not the board, because there's a Sexual Misconduct Advisory Board, which Catherine Long is the chair of. Okay. And that is a completely separate body, and it's essentially a watchdog body for the Misconduct Board. So I don't know if you spoke to somebody from that group.
I talked to 2 different professors.
Okay, because if you talk to somebody from the advisory board, it wouldn't surprise me so much if they didn't know like the ins and outs of the Misconduct Board, because it's not necessarily, they look at the issue more broadly than just the board itself.
So they provide oversight?
They don't provide oversight, they provide recommendations to Vice President Lampkin around the issue more generally, not just the board. So
who trains the board?
We start the training with a national expert. His name is Brett Sokolow. He works with an organization that's pretty nationally recognized for doing trainings and work with colleges and universities around sexual misconduct. He's actually been doing our trainings for many years. He's done a couple iterations of the policy now. And that's a 2-day training for new members. So the first day is very focused on the dynamics of sexual misconduct and just understanding the issue a little bit, as well as the policy and understanding the policy and how it works. And then we usually do some case study work with them as well on that first day. And then the second day, all the members come. So the first day is focused on new members, the second day is everybody, and then we do case studies as a group the second day. And then we do some refresher trainings during the course of the year as well.
Okay. When a student is found guilty, so the board then decides the guilty, not guilty verdict?
They decide on a finding, and then they decide on a sanction.
How are the sanctions set? Are there guidelines for sanctions?
So they are required to consider a suspension or expulsion. So the way I put it is they're required to consider whether or not this person should remain in the community, right. If they should be out of the community, for how long should they be out of the community, or should they be permanently out of the community. So what they usually do is they consider that expulsion and suspension first. Obviously if they expel, there's nothing more to do, but if they suspend, they usually also set additional requirements for return.
How many reports does the university receive each year?
In terms of formal complaints, or?
I read that there are informal and formal complaints.
There are.
Differentiating first?
Yeah, not at all. So I can tell you that I spoke to 38 sexual assault survivors last year.
Yeah.
9 of them brought some form of complaint forward to the board. 5 of those were informal and 4 were formal.
Informal is under a formal investigation or formal report.
Yes, formal went through a full investigation and hearing.
And that can lead to expulsion.
Yes.
You said on August 24th at the Honor O Days that no student has been expelled in your time here. Is that correct?
That's true.
And why is that?
In general, I think the board has opted to suspend people and have requirements on them for their return. I don't believe they've felt like they've had enough information or evidence to expel permanently.
What is the longest suspension that a student has been sanctioned with?
2 years.
And what's the average suspension time?
It's usually 1 to 2 years.
1 to 2 years. It's just interesting because the most severe punishment for poor academic performance is on the first suspension 1 year, and then on the second academic suspension it's expulsion. So it's interesting to me that it's 1 to 2 years. Okay.
And I think one thing also to differentiate, because I often get the question, why do we expel for cheating and we don't expel for sexual misconduct? The honor committee decides cases that are beyond a reasonable doubt standard. Our standard is a preponderance of the evidence, so it's quite a bit lower than the beyond a reasonable doubt standard. So I think there's some mitigation there in terms of sanction and standard.
But you would think that if the standard were lower for sexual assault cases, that there would be more guilty verdicts and more expulsions, correct?
Well, I think what you're seeing is if a board feels they're only 51% certain that somebody committed an offense, they're not necessarily willing to expel that person permanently.
On August 24th at Honor O Days, again, you said that students have actually admitted guilt to you.
Yes.
Why were the students not expelled?
Well, honestly, I feel like in the context of an informal resolution meeting, there's really no advantage to admitting guilt. There's no need to admit guilt. They're not actually in a hearing proceeding. And I feel like if a person is willing to come forward in that setting and admit that they violated the policy when there's absolutely no advantage to do so, that does deserve some consideration. That they're willing to say that I've done something wrong and I recognize that and I'm willing to take my licks and deal with it. That's very important to me. I think that shows a level of understanding of what they did that I don't see in a hearing necessarily.
But you just said that the reason that students are not expelled is because some are 51% sure. It sounds like that's 100% sure.
Well, in those cases too, you need to understand there hasn't been a full investigation. I'm going on that sanction based on this person's admission and what they're telling me.
But if a student admits guilt, there doesn't even need to be a full investigation. They've admitted guilt.
Yeah, that's correct, but I don't necessarily know all of the ins and outs of what occurred. I generally do know that from having heard both stories within the informal context. The other thing to understand is a lot of times students choose that informal context that they're not looking for expulsion or they're not looking for that type of a sanction. They're looking to be able to look into the eyes of that other person and say, you've wronged me in some way, and they're generally feeling quite satisfied with the fact that the person has admitted that they've done something wrong.
But what is the point of an investigation?
What's the point of an investigation? To figure out whether or not an incident occurred generally in that investigation process, yes.
Right. So even in an informal hearing, if both individuals are telling their side of the story and one admits guilt, doesn't that seem like you've solved the problem of...
Sure, and what I'm telling you is I do feel like that person admitting in that context, it shows a recognition of what they've done is wrong and a willingness to improve in a way that going through a hearing and sitting there the entire time and saying I didn't do anything doesn't.
I actually was going to say this. On August 24th, you said that you believe that students who admit guilt feel remorse, and that also that you believe in rehabilitation. And I believe that's what you're saying again now.
Yes.
So you do believe in the rehabilitation of students who commit and admit to sexual assault?
I believe it's possible.
Do you not believe that students who cheat or lie or steal are capable of remorse?
I actually do, yes.
Okay. The university has decided that expulsion is, again, the appropriate punishment for lying, cheating, and stealing. And by setting such a standard, has inevitably set itself up to have its punishments for other offenses compared to this standard. by not expelling students who've been found guilty or have admitted guilt in sexual assault cases, the school is tacitly making the statement that sexual assault cases are less punitive than cases of lying to
I don't believe that at all.
Why not?
Because, well, first of all, let's be honest that people find the fact that we expel people for cheating quite controversial and have difficulties with that fact. And as you know, your reporting rates in honor are quite low, and many people attribute that to the fact that expulsion is the only sanction. So I think the expulsion for honor is fraught with issues in and of itself. So I don't think the university is necessarily saying, oh, sexual assault's not as important as honor because we don't expel in every single case. I don't buy that at all.
So the university is not making the statement that sexual assault cases are less punitive than lying, cheating, and stealing when the punishment for sexual assault is suspension.
I think I've already answered your question.
Okay. So, I just don't really understand. So in the American court system, it's organized so that more severe punishments offenses receive more severe punishments, and lesser offenses receive lesser punishments. Do you not think that the university should follow the same system?
I think that for every case of sexual misconduct that comes through, we always consider whether or not a student should remain in the community. And I think that we are considering those severe punishments, absolutely.
But it has never, in your time here, been...
Not an expulsion, but I think a 2-year suspension with requirements to return is quite a stiff penalty.
What about those who spout repeat offender statistics? On August 24th, you said that those students are, and I quote, the smart ones who do not get caught.
I think that's true to some extent. I do.
You don't think that a student who is being reported for reported for a sexual assault case or a rape, you don't think that there's a chance that they've done that before?
I think there's absolutely a chance that they've done that before, but I also think when we are dealing with a particular case, we need to sanction based on the facts of that case. We can't sanction based on repeat offender research. If we have information that that person has been a repeat offender, I think we would absolutely expel that person from the community. But we haven't had that information in the past.
I do not understand. And again, you said that you'd answered the question, but I don't think that you have. How is it that a student has admitted guilt and you see that the student should and does return to grounds with their victims?
I think I answered your question.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you this. Do the people who cheat, lie, and steal have victims?
They can.
How?
I'm following where you're going with this, but I don't think I'm going to answer your question. I feel like I've already answered your question.
Do you not think that it's damaging for sexual assault victims to see the person who sexually assaulted or raped them on grounds?
I think it absolutely can be.
So why are they allowed back on grounds?
Because I think we are trying to balance the rights of the individual who's being accused as well as the rights of the complainant, and sometimes that's very difficult.
It is difficult, but do you guys have any other questions?
No, I think this is going very well.
So you're saying that the honor punishment should change and the sexual assault punishment should stay the same?
I'm not saying that the honor punishment should change. What I'm saying is it is a controversial punishment in and of itself.
The honor? Okay.
Yes. You will go and hear from many people that they do not agree with the single sanction of the honor system. I believe the vote on the IR showed that very, very clearly.
But do you not believe in a single sanction for rape?
I feel that is an issue. That's a concern that I think we should have more penalties, because I am afraid that if we only have a single sanction, that actually will also hurt our reporting for cases of sexual misconduct.
Do you not think that when victims see the person who sexually assaulted or raped them on grounds, that would dissuade them from reporting?
When they've already been through a case? I'm not following your logic.
Do you not think that when the worst punishment for sexual assault or rape is suspension, that a victim is less likely to come forward because they will see their attacker on grounds?
I think that there is a concern that people won't report if they believe there's only one sanction.
And what has led you to that conclusion?
Well, I think the honor context is something that shows that to be true.
But
I also have worked with many survivors who, I think you would be surprised to see the number of survivors who I've worked with who don't even want to file a complaint because they don't want to get the accused person in trouble.
You don't think it's that
you
they
would
don't
be
want to see the person?
You would be very surprised how many times I hear I do not want to get him in trouble. You would be incredibly surprised by that.
And why do you think that is?
Because oftentimes they have a connection to this other individual.
And they don't want to face that individual.
I don't believe that it's what it is. They often have a personal connection to this other person,
right.
And they do not want to see them punished.
Again, so when these people come to you, they don't even, when they come to meet with you and tell you, I have been assaulted, the next step is to file an informal or a formal
If they wish to, and as I told you, I spoke to 38 students last year, only 9 of them wish to file a complaint. So many of them choose not to do that, and that's not because I'm telling them not to do it. That is their choice.
Do you think expulsion would deter rapists and sexual assault assailants?
I can't answer that question.
You don't think that it would deter rapists if there was the standard of expulsion?
I don't know that it would, because I don't believe that they think they'll get caught.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Do I get to see this? Are you going to edit it?
Yeah.